Hello and welcome to Extra Time. This is part 2 in our 4-part series with our good friends and colleagues here at Muckle LLP, who are here to talk to us today all about legal structures.
Yep, Tom and Carla, you are our super team, because we know when we go out and talk to football clubs across the country, legal structures is not only really important, there are some complexities to it as well. You're here to help simplify matters for us. Thank you so much. Before I dive in and ask you loads of questions, tell us a little bit about yourselves and the role you do here at Muckle.
Yeah, so my name's Tom Seed. I'm a solicitor here in the sports team at Muckle. So a lot of our day-to-day work is about assisting sports clubs and football clubs especially with their governance, with their structures, and having them really understand what they are now and what they could be, legally speaking, to fit their ambitions.
I'm Carla Boaks. I'm also a solicitor in the Sports Education and Charities team with Tom, working alongside Tom and the team, helping the sports clubs with, as we say, sort of governance, legal structures, any sort of issues or questions that come about.
So the subject matter is legal structures in this episode. So let's make it really basic. Can you give us a definition of what is a legal structure?
Yeah, of course. So a legal structure is how your club is set up in the eyes of the law. So there's different legal structures that are available to football clubs. We'd always recommend that clubs take a look at their current legal structure, make sure that it's fit for purpose and that it's aligned with your club's ambitions and aspirations. And that's particularly the case, as you mentioned, when you first set up, clubs are often sort of unincorporated associations. That's the type of structure that we see most grassroots and amateur clubs set up with. So particularly if you are an unincorporated association, taking a look at your legal structure is something that we would definitely advise.
So you mentioned there unincorporated associations, because when you go and meet football clubs and you sit down with a committee and you ask that dreaded question, like, what is your legal setup? Quite a lot of the time, some volunteers don't perhaps even know what their structure is, or more often than not, they are unincorporated. So, like, Tom, where do they start with that, and what should clubs do if they are unincorporated?
Yes, as you say, it's not always easy to tell what the actual club structure is. But generally speaking, we find that if you're not registered with Companies House, then there's a pretty good chance that you're an unincorporated association, which sets off alarm bells for us. It's always a bit of a red flag if clubs are unincorporated, because it means that they technically don't have a separate legal personality, which means effectively they can't enter into contracts as a club on behalf of the club. So what that means is many clubs who might have sort of staff, so they have employment contracts, they might have a lease, they might have other commercial arrangements. And the committee members of those clubs, so the sort of volunteers who just sort of want to get a game of football on, end up being personally liable for those contracts on behalf of the club, which exposes them obviously to quite a big level of legal risk. So in the worst sort of cases, I mean, we've had clubs where people's mortgages and cars are on the line in the sort of worst case scenario when things go wrong. So we always recommend to incorporate. And then on top of that, another benefit of it is that you get much more access to grant funding because of the risks associated with being unincorporated. A lot of the grant funders just simply won't give to unincorporated associations.
So your kind of take then on being an unincorporated association, it's like, is it a little bit of a red card? Like something to, if someone's watching this and they're at a club that is currently unassociated, like action point number 1, go and correct that, sort that, protect yourself. Is that the kind of advice we'd be saying?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's definitely a strong yellow, maybe an orange.
One of those challenges,
one
right?
Of those,
I get it.
yeah, VAR maybe. But
And some clubs would say that they come to us and say, oh, well, we've got insurance. And I think that's sort of the magic answer that's available to them. But the problem with insurance is that it only covers certain risks, and we often find that there's excess that are applicable. So for us, if there were a magic answer per se, we would say that would be incorporation.
Yeah, because it's covering you, sort of, as you mentioned, legally from any risks, opening up to more grant funding as well. And I'm imagining for volunteers as well, just giving them an extra sense of protection that at the end of the day, we all give up our time because we either want to see players playing with smiles on their faces and so on. It's just another thing to not have to worry about, so that's good.
Yeah, and I think it's key for those key officials in the club to know that once they are incorporated, that they are personally liable. And we're not trying to scare anybody with this, but obviously it is a real consideration. And you mentioned it earlier, Carla, about what's your ambitions, what your aspirations. If you want to be in facility ownership or have a lease of land and stuff, you need to be incorporated to obviously protect yourself, but also be eligible for those type of assets and opportunities.
Yeah.
So going back to like incorporation and obviously the gardens yourselves, where do you start with a club when they actually have that initial conversation around, we're thinking of becoming incorporated, but then we know there's other legal entities once you get into that realm of incorporation?
Yeah, so when a club comes to us, we would have a look at their current structure and the sort of activities that they're doing. We might suggest incorporation where you would become sort of the sort of different options available, but that might be a company limited by guarantee. It could be a community interest company, which is also known as a CIC, or even a charitable incorporated organisation, or known as a CIO. So when they would come to us, we would see which structure would be the best. And as we sort of mentioned, the key thing really is that moving that personal liability away from the committee members themselves and onto that legal structure instead. We would kind of assess where the club was at, and you sort of mentioned some of what we'd refer to as the key triggers for incorporation earlier, talking about the property. So that would be one thing. If a club was looking at leasing into property, we would consider that to be a key sort of trigger to really start thinking about incorporation. Other things where would sort of be an alarm bell in our heads would be if a club were starting to employ any staff, and also if they were entering into any significant contracts, so quite often with grant funding or sponsorship, or even sometimes with sort of construction contracts. Yeah. So all those things together, we'd be starting to say, okay, if you're either doing those things or even thinking about doing them, then incorporation is going to be the best route for you.
Yeah, clubs quite often, I think they might understand that there's a grant funding opportunity and that might be the trigger for them to incorporate, but they didn't realise that they had these legal liabilities underpinning their current structure, and they might not understand the governance steps required to become sort of a company, as a sort of simple example.
It's part of the reason why we wanted to come and visit you, because we have so many incredible accredited clubs, from 1-star to 3-star, lots of different setups. Some provide youth football into adult, disability football and so on. So each choice and each journey a club goes on is going to be very bespoke, specific and individual to them. But Carla was mentioning there, outlining the different options. I suppose, Tom, it is just about that club knowing exactly what's going to be the best choice for them.
Yeah, precisely. As you say, there's no sort of one-size-fits-all. Really, I think the right sort of legal structure for a club will be determined by what the strategic leaders have in mind for the club on a sort of long-term basis. So if their main priority is we want to be a thriving community centre, we might recommend one club which might have a sort of charitable slant, one structure, which might fit that vision. Whereas if they're saying we want to sort of climb the leagues at all costs, it's more of like a football ambition sort of thing, we'll recommend a different structure. But the most important thing, we always say, is the financial sustainability. So you have to make sure that the finances are looked after, that the club's going to be viable on a long-term basis. So you have to consider things like commercial contracts, what sort of investment opportunities you might have, other sort of fundraising opportunities and things like that. So we always recommend that if you sort of follow the thread of those points, that'll lead you towards the right structure for your club. And then on top of that, I mean, some clubs can keep it simple and just sort of have one entity, so one company, whereas some clubs have a more sort of sophisticated group structure, so they might need one section which houses the senior clubs, one section for the junior section.
I think that's so common, isn't it? That junior adult setup divide.
Yeah,
as
exactly.
well.
Quite often, if the senior section sort of grows beyond the level that can remain sort of legally associated to the junior section, then it makes sense to spin that out. And then sometimes clubs will have a separate trading subsidiary as well, if that's required.
It's interesting because even in that sense, some people might not be aware that you can be a football club with different legal entities under one umbrella, so to speak. And another thing listening to you there was highlighting the strategic leaders within a football club, because of course this is probably down to the decision makers, those that sit on committees, take up roles like chairperson, club secretary, club treasurer. So again, would you recommend those kind of bodies coming together when they're making decisions like this, rather than it being like an individual perhaps taking the responsibility on their own shoulders? Getting a whole committee involved will help them make better decisions.
Yeah, definitely. Those sort of decisions are made at that level. And yeah, it's really important that they do think about these things and look at incorporation, because as we know, these are people giving up their time really for the love of the sport, and we need to make sure that they're afforded the right protections for them.
Absolutely. That's a really good note to end this section on, because I'm going to make a quick substitution. Tom and Carla will be back later on, but we've spoken about the journeys that football clubs have been on around their governance structures. We're going to bring in one of our club consultants now who's helped many a club on this journey.
And here he is now with us, Frank Bell, one of our FA club consultants who's worked with a number of accredited clubs over the last 5, 6, 7 years on their governance prior to getting the professional support from Muckle. So thanks for joining us, Frank.
Yeah, you're like a legend in this area as well. We're here on your home patch where you have, as Tom said, helped so many clubs around their football governance. And as you well know, it's really common that clubs firstly are a little bit unsure of what their current setup is and how to even start by getting fit for purpose for the future. So when you go meet with clubs, what is your very first piece of advice at the start of the process?
I think it's important to establish what their journey is going to be. And if I can sort of point out that when anybody goes on a car journey, whether it's from Newcastle to London, you always make sure you've got enough fuel in your vehicle, enough oil, water, appropriate clothes if it's going to be winter, etc. And likewise, a club, if it's going on a 5-year journey, it's got to make sure it's got the right resources, the right equipment, the right assets, but also, importantly, the right governance structure in place to complete that journey successfully without any troubles or hassle.
So sticking with that analogy, Frank, what if I get halfway to London and I've not packed my winter coat? Should clubs really be afraid or scared that they've potentially missed something? Or is the opportunity for them to reflect backwards and start to consider making them changes and maybe just have a little pit stop and pick up the winter coat?
Absolutely right, Tom. And many clubs that we come across are not the right structure for the journey that they're going on. So it's our job to try and point out the opportunities that were there, the benefits that are there, and then engage with Muggles and such like and get that structure in place, which hopefully puts them in a good place for that journey, but also opens doors for them.
Let's keep this analogy going then. So we talk about journeys because, again, volunteers listening to this, they will be at football clubs where at the moment they might have X amount of teams. They could be a junior club with ambitions to add a women's setup. There's a whole variety of different scenarios, and that is the point of being involved in the club. You want to help it to be better. So you might have ambitions for a 5-year plan, a 3-year plan, a 2-year plan, but as you go down that road, opportunities present themselves as well. So is it important that clubs know that there is also a bit of agility when it comes to football governance as well? You might have a setup in a certain way, but your needs might change. But as long as you're having that consideration, that's the most important thing to bear in mind.
Yeah, it is really, the structures that we have, do allow for flexibility within that. And once we know the ultimate goal of the club, there is flexibility through that journey, whether it's 3 years, 5 years, or even longer, to ensure that that flexibility is in there for them to make the necessary changes. But we all know that when you complete a 5-year business plan, 24 hours later, it's out of date. And there will be changes, but the important bit is that the shape and the structure is right and such like. And then hopefully many opportunities come along, and hopefully we've got the club in the right structure to take advantage of those opportunities.
And Tom, we're lucky, aren't we, through In the Box and Extra Time, we get to visit some brilliant clubs across the country. And the reason why we wanted to start and have this governance series as well is it's brilliant to celebrate success and where things go right. But of course, there are challenges, there are difficulties, sometimes there are mistakes, and it's good to share that practice as well. So in your experience, perhaps, what are the biggest challenges, or where have clubs made common mistakes that you'd advise people watching and listening now to avoid if possible?
I think initially a club, quite often when it's the junior section, they'll set up originally as a charity. And that may not be wrong for the initial setup, but going forward, if the club has got ambitions now for ladies football, men's football in the NLS, it's not really appropriate in terms of paying people's wages and obviously commercial operation and such like. So we need to have a look at that structure, see if it's appropriate. And it might still be appropriate for the junior section of the club, which was probably the initial founder of the club, but not necessarily for the men's first team or the ladies' first team, or indeed the operational aspects of the facilities. So we need to look at those and quite often change them. You know, we've also spoken about unincorporated associations. There's nothing wrong with the juniors staying unincorporated if all they do is play football, pay subs, and they have no liabilities or employees associated with that.
And you've seen the growth of clubs over the last 5-6 years. Our 3-star accredited clubs are averaging over 40 teams now. And I think for some clubs, affiliation to their local county FA as one entity often might make them feel like they don't need to then consider the different elements of that club and what them structures potentially need to be. So the example that you give earlier, if you've got a senior team playing in the Men's National League system and you're talking about paying players or expenses to coaches, etc., you need to have a look at what that legal entity needs to be. And like you say, if you've got a youth pathway all the way through to that adult team, but they are just playing for participation in the main, it's all right to remain unincorporated or potentially a charity because of the opportunities that might provide the different entities playing at different levels of the game.
Yeah, as you mentioned there, you know, the opportunities with the different structures. If you've got the first team, it may well be, it could be incorporated by shares, particularly if you're looking for an investor to invest in the NLS team, or could be limited by guarantee. But those various structures, you know, a company limited by shares basically can receive funding from Premier League Stadium Fund, which provides funding mostly between 50 and 70% towards ground development. But for the other programmes in terms of Football Foundation, Home Advantage Programme, Greener Game, Howden's Kitchens, which are all fantastic programmes, then you need to have a setup which is a not-for-profit. So really, you've got to have all those elements in mind and where those investments are going to take place to ensure that those parts of the club are set up ready to maximise and take the opportunities that are out there for investment, because as you rightly say, Tom, the growth in clubs is absolutely tremendous out there, and they are now large community assets, but small businesses as well, and need to be run like that and maximise the opportunities that are available.
I think you make a really good point there as well, particularly for those larger 2-star, 3-star accredited clubs. The scale of them is like operating like a small, medium-sized business, and there is no harm in operating like that, even though, again, it's often volunteers and we don't treat football like a business. However, that philosophy can be really useful, especially when it unlocks so many opportunities. We said at the very start, you have helped many, many football clubs. I want to talk to you about Birtley Town Football Club, because they're an example up in the northeast of the country who have gone through a real journey when it comes to their legal structure. Can you tell us a bit more?
Yeah, Birtley Town Football Club, great club, well established, and basically we've talked about the journey that clubs have gone through, particularly in the last 7 or 8 years. In Birtley Town, have actually gone through that journey over the last 7 or 8 years. They had an NLS team, which was established at step 7. They're now playing at step 5. They've got a facility which operates in terms of food, functions, etc., grass pitches, etc. But they were all encapsulated under one charitable structure. We've had to change that structure now because, as Tom mentioned, you know, we're going to pay players, we're going to pay employees as the business grows. We want to be responsible and make sure that people's values are reflected in terms of employment, wages, etc. And now the club has gone into this multi-structure element now, broken out the first team, broken out the facility side, and still kept the juniors separate. And the juniors being separate, also, you know, you always get that question when the subscriptions go up by £2 a month. You'll get that question from the parent. I see Frank wants a new centre forward at the club. And you will get that question, but when you keep the structures separate, it keeps them clean and tidy. But likewise, it opens the doors for applications for Premier League Stadium Fund, Football Foundation. They've been really successful. They've won the Home Advantage programme, which means that they're actually going to take on an asset transfer from the local authority, create more pitches and more facilities for the juniors and community in the area. They've been successful in the Howdens programme, so they've got a brand new kitchen installed at the facility. So a really good progressive club that's come an awful long way and run by people with passion and desire that we see in many clubs in the area. So absolutely fantastic. It's been an honour and a privilege to be involved with that, and I smile every time I walk in the ground, and I'm always welcome with a lovely cup of coffee.
I was going to say, I'm sure they greet you with a big smile as well with all that help.
Yeah, well, that's the payback for us consultants. You know, the friendships that you build through football, they're there for life, and just wonderful people with great values and such like. When you see so many people together, children from 4 years old to walking football, disability football, ladies football, it's just fantastic, and you just can't buy that as a satisfaction. It's absolutely wonderful and truly magic.
And this is what I love about the Accredited Club programme, because everything that you've just said there and what you finished with is it's about the people. It's seeing the kids out on the grass. It's seeing the first team performing in the National League system. But starting with governance and trying to make governance sexy leads to all those opportunities that you spoke about across the 5 pillars that we have our framework set around. So facility opportunities and ambitions, growing your player opportunities to be more diverse for men, women, people with disabilities, young girls, young boys that are having their first experience in a grassroots football club. Broadening your opportunity to embrace your full community, and not just being about what you do on the pitch, but how your clubhouse or facilities can open up to so many other different elements of the community that you've potentially not considered before. And that's why I think we've started with this series, and why it's so important, and it's not scary, that if you do get your governance right, it leads to that growth and opportunity in all of the other areas.
It's like the platform, isn't it? And that's the feeling, like listening to you there and your answers and what clubs have been, it's actually quite exciting. And if you get those principles right, it can lead to just so many brilliant things. And your advice, your expertise really is so valuable, and we really appreciate your time. Before we let you go, one tip. What would be the one tip, the one absolute golden nugget that people listening and watching should take away when it comes to their legal structure?
I think don't be fixed in terms of your view. You know, try and be flexible so that you approach it in a multi-structure. Quite often is the right place to be, but you can tie it all together with a service level agreement, which shows that the club has one identity, one badge, and we all understand what the rules are and what the governance requirements are between the juniors, the ladies, the men's team, the facilities, so we all operate in a coherent manner.
Perfect. Frank, thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Extra Time. I'm going to get the subs board back out because we're going to bring Carla and Tom back to wrap things up on our discussion on legal structures.
So wonderful to hear from Frank Bell, one of our FA Club consultants there, and just actually brings to life why it is so important to have FA Club consultants out there supporting our club network, because of the expertise that they can provide and bridge the gap between the knowledge that they have, but then also the expertise here at Muckle. So thanks for coming back into the episode, Tom, Carla. We've got one final sort of question for you, and it's all around tax status. Can you tell us and the viewers listening a little bit more about it and what that means for their football club?
Yeah, so there is a distinction between your legal structure and your tax status. So we quite often say that if you imagine your legal structure as the photograph and then the tax status as the frame that fits around the photograph. So your legal structure will tell you what the sort of organisation is, and then different tax statuses can attach to different types of organisation. And the two main sort of tax statuses to know about are charitable and community amateur sports club status, or CASC status.
So, for example, there with Tom's analogy, a club could be set up as a company, and then that company would be the photograph, and then that company could apply additionally to have a tax status on top of that, and that could be CASC or charitable status, which would form the frame around the photograph. And clubs may want to apply for that because there's certain tax benefits that come with being a charity or a CASC. So clubs often find that that's a good option for them.
Nice. I like that analogy as well. Kind of paints the picture.
It certainly does. They say a picture paints 1,000 words,
Absolutely.
doesn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and the wonderful thing about the relationship we got yourselves here is that we're now digitising what used to be the club structures guide. So for clubs, that means they can actually go through a digital process now, and it's supplemented with loads of different bite-sized guides, which will branch you off to understand what do we mean by that tax status, what do we mean by incorporation. And by the end of it, it's going to tell them whether their current legal structure is fit for purpose now, or, to your point earlier, Carla, does it suit their aspirations and ambitions? So really excited that that's going to launch and all clubs are going to be able to go through that.
Brilliant. Again, we'll make sure that we link to that in the show notes below, because appreciate for some people this is quite a lot of information to take on board, lots of things to consider, but thank you both so much for your expertise and for breaking it down for us so well. We really appreciate it. And as we mentioned, this is part of our series around football governance. There's lots more to take a deep dive into. Make sure that you subscribe to our channel so you're the first to know when our latest episodes drop. If you've got any questions or queries, if you've heard anything in this episode that you'd like to follow up with a question as well, you can comment below and we will get back to you. That's a wrap on this episode, but there's more to come and we look forward to seeing you again very soon.